My name is Luis Espinosa, and I'm the Director for the Office of Evangelization and Catechesis. We just finished going through the series on the Liturgy of the Word, and so in this video, in this segment, we're going to continue with the next part of Mass, which is the Liturgy of the Eucharist. But I want to first give the context as to what we do within that context of the Liturgy of the Eucharist. For us as a church, every year we celebrate Holy Week, and leading into what we call the Sacred Triduum or the Easter Triduum. And so the day that I usually emphasize the most is Holy Thursday at the evening Mass of the Last Supper. Because it is within this context that we find where we understand better what Jesus is calling us to do. And so we especially pay attention to the readings and look at the gospel. The gospel that we take every year as we celebrate the Last Supper of the Lord, that we take from the Gospel of John chapter 13. So the context of the Eucharist is within the context of the Last Supper, but we need to know what Jesus did before He gave us or instituted the Eucharist. He first washed the feet of His apostles, of His disciples. He brought them into that upper room to celebrate the Passover. But before doing that, He washed the feet to give them and to give us the command of what we must do, of how we must be of service to one another. And so it is within that context that the Eucharist is given to you and to me. And in the Eucharist that we celebrate every time we come together for Mass. And that we remember that every time we celebrate Holy Mass, we celebrate the Triduum, we celebrate this command. And so when we look at the general instruction of the Roman Missal, we find in number 72 an overview of what the Liturgy of the Eucharist is. And so in 72 it says the following: at the Last Supper, Christ instituted the Paschal Sacrifice and banquet, by which the sacrifice of the cross is continuously made present in the church whenever the priest, representing Christ, the Lord, carries out what the Lord Himself did and handed over to His disciples to be done in His memory. So we have to remember that Christ gave them this mandate, gave them this command, and instituted the Eucharist for us. That it is the priest who, in persona Christi, we even dare say in persona Christi capitatis, as Christ Himself, as Christ the head of the body, He offers the sacrifice. Offers the sacrifice at the table, at the altar. The table that is going to signify for you and for me two things. The table of the Last Supper, but also the altar of sacrifice. That sacrifice that Christ did for you and for me. And so it continues on number 72 by saying, for Christ took the bread and chalice, gave thanks, broke the bread, and gave it to His disciples, saying, take, eat, and drink. This is my body. This is the chalice of my blood. Do this in memory of me. Hence, the Church has arranged the entire celebration of the Liturgy of the Eucharist in parts corresponding to precisely these words and actions of Christ. And so we will find and we will see that the Liturgy of the Eucharist is broken up into these parts that Christ said and Christ did. And so we find here in 72, we have these three parts. We have them listed as A, B, and C, as these three parts that we'll be looking forward to in the next upcoming segments. And so for letter A, focuses on the preparation of the gifts. And so again, this is a brief overview of what we'll be seeing in the next few segments. Letter A says the following: at the preparation of the gifts, bread and wine, with water are brought to the altar. The same elements, that is to say, which Christ took into his hands. So this first letter tells us about what's the next part within the liturgy of the Eucharist, the preparation of the gifts. So we go into letter B, the Eucharistic prayer. And so we read that in the Eucharistic prayer, thanks is given to God for the whole work of salvation, and the offerings become the body and blood of Christ. So this is letter B, the second part of the liturgy of the Eucharist, which is the Eucharistic prayer. Lastly and thirdly is through the fraction and Holy Communion, the faithful, though many, receive from the one bread of the Lord's body and from the one chalice that the Lord's blood, in the same way that the apostles received them from the hands of Christ. So remembering that Passover that the Lord celebrated with his apostles, and that he broke bread and distributed the bread, he took the chalice and gave the chalice to the apostles. So we continue to celebrate this memorial. But I have to emphasize is that we don't recreate, or we're not redoing this. It is not about redoing, is that Christ is being made present to us here and now. That same sacrifice, that same offering that was done then is made present now through the work of the Holy Spirit. And so the liturgy of the Eucharist, again, is the way that we continue to live out this command given to us as we read, as we find in the Gospel of John, chapter 13, as we continue to celebrate every year when we celebrate Holy Thursday, when we celebrate the Mass of the Lord's Supper in the evening.